There is something very strange about people born in the 1990s. They do not just remember their childhood, they remember an entire world that has disappeared. A world without smartphones, without stories, without anyone recording every moment just to post it online. They lived long enough in a slower time to understand its value, but they also grew up at exactly the right moment to be pulled into the digital age. And that transition created a very special kind of person, nostalgic, adaptable, clear-minded, but also more easily exhausted than others. If you were born between 1990 and 1999, you grew up between two worlds that never fully matched. On one side were Cartoon Network VHS tapes, Blockbuster, and playing outside until dark. On the other side were YouTube, Netflix, Wi-Fi, social media, and life online 24/7. You do not completely belong to the old world, but you do not truly belong to the new one either. You are the generation in between. And standing in between for too long is not easy, because you can see what the generations after you never had, but you also cannot go back to where you once belonged. Think back to an old Saturday morning. You woke up early just to catch your favorite cartoon at the exact time it aired. There was no rewind, no watch later. If you missed it, it was truly gone. That feeling of waiting made everything more valuable. A short episode became a memory. An ordinary morning became something deeply printed in your mind. If you enjoy this kind of deeper psychological content, subscribe to the channel and stay until the end, because the next part explains why these memories are still affecting you even now. After TV, you went outside. Not because your parents forced you to, but because that was simply how children lived back then. Hide-and-seek, marbles, soccer, riding bikes, climbing trees, wandering around the neighborhood until the streetlights came on. Scraped knees, dirty hands, and clothes covered in dust were not disasters. They were just signs that you had truly lived that day. The original script mentions that children at that time could spend 3 to 4 hours outside each day, while many children today do not even reach 30 minutes. That difference alone is enough to create two completely different kinds of childhood. What mattered was not only where you played, it was how you invented ways to play. Because when you got bored, there was no phone to scroll, no Google to search, no short videos to kill time. So your brain had to work on its own. A stick could become a sword. An empty dirt field could become a battlefield. An ordinary afternoon could turn into an adventure. That kind of creativity is born from empty space. And today it is rarer than people think. But this generation did not just have an analog childhood. What makes them different is that they lived right when technology changed direction. They remember VHS tapes, then saw DVDs appear like magic. They heard the sharp sound of dial-up internet, waited a long time for a web page to load, and then stepped into the world of much faster broadband. They studied with paper books, library indexes, and encyclopedias, yet they were also among the first groups to use computers regularly at school. In other words, they were trained in two different living languages, one of slowness and one of speed. Then comes the part that very few people notice: the right to be embarrassed in private. Before social media, you could be awkward, clumsy, or even do childish things without fearing that they would be saved forever. Most teenage mistakes stayed only within the friend group that saw them. There were no cameras pointed at you all the time, no viral videos, no digital trail following you for years. That gave one generation room to try to fail to be awkward and then grow on their own. They had private space to form their identity before the world started staring at everything. But then, social media arrived. MySpace, Facebook, and Instagram appeared right as this generation was entering the years when identity begins to take shape. And from there, one half of an older mindset started colliding with a completely new one. From living life to presenting life. From connecting to showing that you are connected. From real value to value measured by likes. That is when many people began to feel out of rhythm without understanding why. If you have ever felt like you grew up under one set of rules, then entered adulthood under a completely different set, comment the number 8. That is why nostalgia for people born in the 1990s is not just missing the old days. It goes deeper than that. The original script calls it a very powerful kind of nostalgia because they did not only lose a phase of life, they lost an entire way of existing. Concepts like rosy retrospection bias suggest that the brain tends to keep the beautiful parts of the past and blur the heavier ones. But what they miss is not only old toys or old shows. What they miss is the feeling of living without constant comparison, of being present without needing to record it, of being themselves without performing for an audience. That is also why the mental health section in the original script feels so heavy. Research from the University of California involving more than 27500 adults and cited in this content shows that people born in the 1990s have higher levels of depression, anxiety, and mental distress than those born in the 1980s. And the problem does not seem to fade over time the way many people assume. It may even continue as they get older. This does not mean that this generation is weaker. It means they grew up during a very intense psychological transition. Look at the mismatch in values. They were taught that friendship is built through real time, real presence, and truly being there for each other. But then they entered a world where connection could be turned into content. They were taught that self-worth comes from ability, character, and what you can truly do. But later they had to live in an environment where attention sometimes seems more valuable than honesty. When a person has to carry two life maps that no longer match, the mind gets tired, not because they are weak, but because they have had to translate themselves for years. Even so, this is not only a story of loss. This generation has a very rare advantage. They still remember what it feels like to live without being completely consumed by devices. They know how to sit down for a meal without holding a phone. They know how to go somewhere without constantly posting updates. They know how to wait without immediately becoming irritated. They waited for music to download, waited for photos to be developed, waited for a show to air at the right time before they could watch it. Those experiences taught them patience, delayed gratification, and the ability to value things that do not arrive instantly. That is why people born in the 1990s often become bridges in society. At work, they understand how older generations think, but they can still keep up with new technology. In families, they are often the ones explaining things to their parents, while also understanding children growing up with screens. They stand in the middle of many conversations, often tired but also deeply necessary. Because the people who remember both sides are usually the ones who know what should be kept and what should be let go. Perhaps the hardest part for this generation is the feeling of not fully belonging anywhere. They understand the old world too well to fully blend into the new one, but they have already gone too far to return to the way things were before. It sounds sad, but it may not be unhappiness. It may actually be a form of awareness. You do not have to choose sides between the past was better and the present is more advanced. You can look at both and see that each one has its gains and its losses. If you were born in that period, comment the number 9 so we can recognize each other. The truth is, you are not nostalgic just because of a few old objects or old shows. You are missing the feeling of once being able to live fully inside a moment, without pressure, without performance, without being pulled in too many directions at once. And maybe the most beautiful part is that this feeling is not necessarily gone forever. It can still return if you know what you are looking for. Thank you for watching until the end. If this video touched something real in your own experience, please like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together.